cognition, we now know, is developed over time based on your experience and interactions with your environment. It's how your child develops attention skills, thinking, planning, organization. It's how he or she will try out different scenarios. Like I said, they'll try these different characters and then they'll start to remember, oh, I liked being the fireman, or no, I don't really want to do that. I want to swing or climb this tree or whatever the scenarios are. They'll begin to identify with the feeling. And they do this through a lot of experimentation, as we know. Toddlers experimenting all day, every day, that they'll figure out how they can continue to work through this or put it away for another day. That's what cognition is. So cognition is the foundation for language. And it really starts very, very young.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home. So let's get started.
Today, we're going to dive into a topic that is pretty close to my heart. It's the powerful connection between pretend play and talking in your toddler. It's not just about building forts or having tea parties, although those are beautiful scenarios and wonderful experience. But it's literally unlocking your child's language potential, our human communication. And I talk a lot about potential here because science and experience over my career, as well as looking back in the last 50, 80, 100 years, is really showing us that the human potential is so much greater than we would sometimes like to admit, because I think sometimes it's scary admitting that we, at the end of the day, individual humans, are responsible for the outcomes, are responsible for our own well-being and the family that we love and serve. So let's take it back to how language development requires the ability to think symbolically. Or in other words, to use one object to represent another. Right? Spoken words represent our feelings, our thoughts, our desires. So children who are beginning to use toys symbolically, like in pretend play or imaginative play, maybe they are using a spoon to pretend to eat, or maybe they're pretending that the banana is a telephone. They're also developing the ability to use words to represent their actions and their needs and their thoughts. So they first have to do it, like I often say here, through gestures or actions before the words can be formulated and articulated. But there's a lot of synchronicity. Remember, our human body, our whole system of living and growing and developing are these intricate systems talking to one another and building and reinforcing through our experience. So I want you, through this discussion today, to think of the magic of make-believe as laying the foundation for talking and understanding, problem solving, planning, organizing, and our memory. So like I say a lot here, let's keep our goal in sight, our end goal, and not the big, huge dynamic ones like graduating from college and walking her down the aisle, but the more realistic end goal, from getting your baby and toddler to his 5th or 6th birthday, right? You want your 5 or 6-year-old to be engaged and chatty and independent, curious, and to feel more and more comfortable in their own skin and in their own environment. I want you to imagine your toddler's world as that training ground. And you are their coach. You are their number one influencer. So pretend play is really one critical piece to that working out, right? To that training ground, to building and honing those skills. So when they are 5 and 6, and then you can look beyond that. So one of my favorite researchers that I've followed for, I'd say the last 10, 15 years is Dr. Stuart Brown. And I've mentioned his work here in the past on these episodes, but he really is a pioneer in the research of play, all kinds of play, right? Play as a baby and a toddler and a child. And how do we bring that play into our adult life? But for today's purposes, I want to focus on his work and some other people's work, but especially looking at imaginative play as the fuel for your toddler's brain. And that's how Dr. Brown looks at it. That it's not just these cute scenarios, although, like I said, those are heartwarming and endearing and memorable, but it really is that training ground for language and social connection and learning about social relationships and emotional regulation and, trying on these different roles and learning through life experience how to be a human with other humans. But it takes those first 3 years that we talk a lot about here in those specific but important steps to get there. So what Dr. Brown, Stuart Brown, looks at, and one of his best quotes is that play is anything but trivial. And I really, really believe that in my heart of hearts after literally playing on the floor for 35 years. But he goes on to say that it is a biological drive as integral to our health as sleep and nutrition. And that play is essential to develop social skills and adult problem-solving skills. So there's so much more going on, as always, in our early child development. But recently, I listened, or shall I say re-listened, to a podcast by Dr. Andrew Huberman. Many of you might be familiar with his work, but he's a neuroscientist and a pretty big, well-known podcaster. He does direct the Huberman Lab up there in Northern California, but he's an associate professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford University School of Medicine. In a recent episode, number 58, titled Using Play to Rewire and Improve Your Brain, I re-listened to this again because, as always, when you look at adult issues or adult health and well-being or biohacking, as he is often known for, we can't look at the adult situations, whether it's a young adult or an older adult, without going back to infancy and toddlerhood and early child development and how the brain really is plastic or malleable throughout our life, and our experiences help shape that. But what drew me to this particular episode with Dr. Huberman was that he states play is the most powerful portal to plasticity. And I know I've mentioned a lot about neuroplasticity here, and I will dive deeper into what that is and how it's new on the scene over the last 25, 30 years, and how it slowly but surely we're validating its importance. But the other thing that Dr. Huberman states is that play at every stage in life is the way in which we learn the rules for that particular stage in life. And so I think it's important that when we look at our babies and our toddlers, what are they actually doing in their everyday waking hours that helps hone taking advantage of the biology, right? Neuroplasticity and epigenetics. I talked about that in a previous episode. But also connecting these human elements such as cognition and language through the medium of play. And play, I think, often gets a bad rap that we as adults have removed ourselves from play so much that we forget that our young people, right, whether they're toddlers or school age or high schoolers, need this play to learn the rules for that stage in life. And so today we're going to cover the fundamentals of your toddler entering this beautiful phase or beautiful stage in life, pretend and imaginary play, and why it's so dang important. And it starts to emerge 18, 24 months of age, but it really starts to take shape around that third birthday and will continue through their 11th and 12th birthday. And the goal, I hope, is to inspire a lot of us grown-ups, as well as the children in our life, to perhaps embrace pretend and imaginary play at any stage, because it's that important, right? Okay, so for today's purpose, I'm hoping that the information that I share with you will help you take these tools, analyze where your child is on this developmental journey, and then how you can foster, enhance, expand this process that they're living through. And the good news that Dr. Huberman and many, many others state is that these skills can be expanded upon, acknowledged at any stage, right? That's what neuroplasticity is. That, yes, it's true, you either use it or lose it, but it doesn't always mean that we completely prune it away, although we do prune quite a bit from what we're born with, I think close to 40%. But what happens then is we hone the rest of the neurosynapses and build these network systems that become more and more efficient and more automatic. And that's what mastery is all about. But in these first 3 years, we have to take literally baby steps. And you and I, as the adults, as the ones responsible for these beautiful children, need to model and provide examples. Otherwise, their more survival reflexes will just let them be. They'll be, quote unquote, healthy enough to survive, but we want your toddler to thrive. And that's where us adults have to step in, right? Take charge, be the leader. So at this point, I just want to make a side note that these concepts that I'm going to talk about today regarding pretend play and imaginary play in particular are especially true when we discuss autism. And I do state that will be in a separate episode talking about, the challenges with children who have or who present under the umbrella of autism. Today, I just maybe in the back of our minds continue to think about this unique relationship between pretend play, cognition, and language development. And that you might be able to understand more of why kids who present as autistic, right? We use that term autism as that, a title, right? Because there's a lot of really nuanced material under that. But if we look at how pretend play grows and develops, then we might have a better understanding deeper of the struggles that these kids present with through their development, right? That there are glitches in their neurological system. Their wiring system is different. And I believe through my experience, and I have seen hundreds and hundreds of children on the autism spectrum, that these glitches block or interfere with the building of these necessary neural pathways. And so when I talk about how pretend play, how going through that process helps develop these neural pathways, you'll be able to line that up if we think about what some of these challenges that autistic children present with, such as inflexibility or difficulty expanding the flow of thought, right? And their imagination, they're very rigid. They have a lot of repetitive actions. They use a lot of memorized language. And those kinds of behaviors are restrictive because they don't have the building blocks, or their systems aren't allowing themselves to build that fluidity. And I'll go in on that on another episode, but I just wanted to make a side note. Perhaps these behaviors can be better understood once we know what typical neurodevelopment looks like, right? And how the environment can influence and support growth and development. So I just wanted to make that side note. At the same time, reiterate what Dr. Huberman says, that neuroplasticity is lifelong. Whether you're 4 or 6 and struggling with autistic behaviors, or you're 46 and you're trying to do something new in your life, that neuroplasticity is there. We just have to create the environments to practice and stretch ourselves over time. That 46-year-old is going to be a little less malleable because the ridges or those neural pathways are dug in deep. And to undo that or to create a new pathway takes more work and more effort, but it can be done. It's just a lot easier when you're 3 or 6 or 8. And I just wanted to put that out there. So now I want to step back into Dr. Stuart Brown's work regarding pretend play, because he stipulates that it really is, this imagination is really the ultimate brain builder. And it correlates with speech and language growth and development too. So for that first year or 18 months, your child, your baby, your infant, your new toddler is honing those auditory skills, listening to the world and trying to figure out how to move this body and strengthen it and coordinate it and all of that. And those are those basic building blocks for that foundation. And then as they really acquire enough information, and you'll see what the breakdown is, how they use play as the medium to build their language and cognition and to build their understanding of how they can initiate and be a part of this outer world. According to Dr. Stuart Brown, pretend play is the ultimate brain builder. And he was one of the founders of an organization called National Institute for Play. And I've always said, wow, that would be a great organization to work for. But NIFP, and they have a great website. I'll have the link down below. They identify 8 play types through our life, actually. And his work really focuses on adults who are facing serious challenges, whether they're social challenges or emotional challenges or relationship issues or pretty severe criminal issues. He has studied for the last 30, 35 years how early child development, i.e. play, can either make or break a well-adjusted, happy, healthy adult. And the correlations, the research, to me, phenomenal, and that we cannot underestimate the importance, not only for academic skills and being a happy 5 and 6-year-old when he runs off to kindergarten or first grade, but it's really about our lifelong health and well-being. Yes, cognition is part of it. And yes, human communication is a big piece because we're focusing on those first 3 years. But ultimately, it's our ability. I mean, just think about us as adults, no matter how adult you are, whether you're still in your 20s or 30s or 50s or 60s, that when we approach life, approach our day with a playful manner, with a playful attitude, with lightheartedness, with creativity, with joy, and just this lightness, whether we're riding our bike or going for a hike or playing a card game or Chutes and Ladders, or any of the play-based, or it could be open-ended play, right? It could be art, or it could be your garden, or it could be reading poetry and just walking on the beach and feeling the beauty all around you. That is all a part of this. And it starts in infancy. It starts with you at the helm, helping them shape those early nuggets into bringing play throughout their life. So Dr. Brown's work at the National Institute for Play, NIF, like I said, identifies these 8 stages. Attunement, which I've talked a lot about here, that first year, getting in tune with your baby. Body and movement play, that's all about letting your baby get in tune with himself or herself, right? Crawling, tummy time, all of that. Object play, we talk a lot about that with mouthing things and his first foods and all of that. And then imaginative or pretend play, and that's what we're going to dive into today. There's social play, rough and tumble play, celebratory and ritual play, storytelling, and narrative, right? Those are the same. Those are the 8. But all of them are critically important. And in a perfect world, we would all carry all of them throughout our life. And I think as we became more and more, quote unquote, civilized in this modern world, we're compartmentalizing them a lot. And part of my goal is to get all of us adults perhaps more in tune with our inner child, right? Our playful manner, and to bring more of these back to life. And we can start it, but as a new mom, as a new dad, you can say, okay, I mean, that certainly happened to me, not necessarily as a new mom, because I was in practice for about 15 years before I became a new mom, but in developing my clinical skills, developing that relationship with the little children that I started to work with, I needed to tap into my child, my inner child, and learn how to play, because I was kind of a serious kid, I think my whole life, and I really didn't enjoy playing on a regular basis until my late 20s, until after graduate school, and it was really the kids in my life that brought that I needed to figure out how to get down on the floor and be present and not take myself so seriously. So that's another little sidebar. But Dr. Stuart Brown's work really helped open my eyes to how important all of these stages that can overlap over time, right? And it really helps us be more connected with ourselves and the people in our community. So I don't want you as a new mom or a new dad or a new grandparent to think, now play, an imaginary play, this has to be kind of a structured format that I have to add to my to-do list. I want you to think of it as a key ingredient that will help spark life into language and cognition, and it helps meld all of these pieces together. It is the medium in which kids learn. And because we think of work and play as opposites, but one of the things that Dr. Stuart Brown stipulates is that the opposite of play is really depression. And that's what he found in his work and his study with adults who have unhealthy relationships with themselves and society at large, right? Very serious psychological issues and social emotional issues and all of that. But he looks at that the opposite of play is really depression. And the more that I really think about that, I believe it to be true. You know the old saying, do what you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. I think that speaks volumes. And so let's bring it back to Dr. Brown and Dr. Huberman and all of these people that I like to read up on their work. They really are doing what they love, and it helps me help you. So it's kind of this domino effect. But back to Dr. Stewart's work, or Stuart Brown's work, that he really stipulates how pretend play helps your toddler feel more independent by letting him or her dive deeper into their own internal world. Remember, they don't have a lot of language yet, like real words, that symbolic representation. So they're acting through and experiencing their life through behaviors, right? And so by pretending or imagining, it's giving them a sense of shaping their identity, right? What do they like? What don't they like? Do they like to dig in the dirt? Do they like to climb trees? Do they like to dress up? Do they like to drive a car? Do they like to cook? You know, all of these trials, and they're figuring out who they are as an individual. And I know this is kind of cerebral or a little esoteric, but if we step back and look at this big picture, then it helps us in our day-to-day life understand when we're playing with our little ones, you know, hide and seek, or if we're doing dress up or putting on lipstick or dressing up the cat, whatever the play is, be in it with them and help them, and then step back, right? And I'll talk a lot about that ebb and flow, how to step forward and model for them at the same time that then you step back and wait for them to practice and decide what do they like to do and what don't they like to do, right? So these first few years, we have to ignite it. We have to kind of get that fire going, right? We have to spark that interest and that curiosity. And it's a dance. It's that ebb and flow. It's that on and off. It's wait and see at the same time that you're kindling the fire, right? So, and I talk a lot about that here, and that's something that your child will need you more in some stage of growth and development and less over here. Sometimes that's just how they're wired, and they'll take the ball and run with it, and it'll be us trying to keep up with them. And then other times we really need to lead them until they get the groove, and then they can pick it up. So before I really step into the stages of pretend play and how you can help trigger that or start stoking the fire, like I said, let's take a first quick peek at what is cognition. And I often have to clarify, because I think it's important that we're all on the same page, right? And that no one is really looking at IQ or intelligence. That cognition used to, I think, when I was growing up, and even part of my formal education taught me that IQs and intelligence were fixed at birth, that you were born with this genetic predisposition and that's who you are. And we just simply know that that's not true anymore. And that's a good thing, right? That goes back to neuroplasticity. It goes back to life experience and epigenetics that I've talked about in previous episodes. But one woman who built her whole career around this, Carol Dweck, and I've cited her work before, but she, in the last 30 years, I think it started to percolate in the 80s and 90s when I first came into practice, but it was that fixed versus growth mindset. And through her work, there's been a plethora of studies looking at how children, based on how we set up the dynamics, they can believe whether they can do something or not, whether it's going to be hard and they're going to be successful, or that they judge themselves based on the outcome. And what Carol Dweck's work is really about is that we as the adults should reinforce the effort and the possibility less than the outcome, right? And the outcome is just telling us, oh, it didn't work this time, right? That saying that Einstein tried 1,000 different ways to create electricity, and it was his 1,001 time. And he just kept saying, well, I haven't figured it out yet. I know these 1,000 efforts over here, they don't work. So that's good. I'll just keep trying. And I'm glad that he did. But on that note, cognition, we now know, is developed over time based on your experience and interactions with your environment. It's how your child develops his or her attention skills, thinking, planning, organization. It's how he or she will try out different scenarios. Like I said, they'll try these different characters, and then they'll start to remember, oh, I liked being the fireman, or no, I don't really want to do that. I want to swing over here or climb this tree or whatever the scenarios are. They'll begin to identify with the feeling, right? And they do this through a lot of experimentation, as we know, right? Your toddler's experimenting all day, every day. And then there's these trials and errors that they'll figure out how they can continue to work through this or put it away for another day, right? But that's what cognition is. So cognition is the foundation for language. And it really starts very, very young. And I've mentioned this in the past, that those early cognitive skills are developed, again, through their experience with you in those first 8, 10, 12 months. The first one is object permanence. We all know what that is, but the importance of it in understanding cognitively, oh, that the ball rolled under the couch, I can't see it, but it's still there. So I can begin to imagine it. I know it still exists, right? If mama leaves the room and goes into the kitchen, he knows mama's still in his world. She just went into the kitchen to get some water or something, right? And so they can begin to imagine, and that's where object permanence is really, really important. And then the early cause and effect. Oh, if I push this button, the door opens. Or if I crank this little handle here, the, Jack in the Box will pop up, right? And so they begin through minor little, you and I look at it as play, but that's real work. That's real learning. That's real development in real time. And then there's that early problem solving. So even if he's beginning to crawl, and maybe he hasn't even mastered crawling yet, but he sees something shiny on the other side of the room and he's scooting, he's doing everything he can. Some kids will get really, really clever and like, oh, I can just pull this little blanket and maybe that shiny thing will get closer to me. Or maybe once they do start crawling and they crawl across the room and they get close to the coffee table and they're like, uh-oh, how do I get around? Can I go under? Can I pull to a stand? Can I scream and shout and get someone's attention and they can help me? Those are all early problem solving. And so those cognitive skills come long before speech and language. But they have to start wiring these systems, these networks, to build upon that. Okay, so now I want to walk through 5 predictable stages, and I've put these in an outline. Again, I think I have a lot of detail that I like to share, and if you guys can have a checklist or an outline that will help solidify or keep some of these ideas and concepts in your forebrain, then great. Just find that link down below and take them home. So the first of these 5 predictable stages is called self-pretend. And it usually starts around that first birthday, give or take, and up until 16, 18 months of age. But this is the stage where your toddler will perform one pretend action at a time on themselves. And so you can find a 16, 18 month will pretend to eat with a spoon, right? Or they'll pretend to drink from a cup. Or if they see a nice fluffy pillow, they'll pretend to go to sleep. So they are starting to do it on themselves, and it's usually just one pretend action at a time. And they usually use things that look quite realistic. And that's why, one of the reasons why we have plastic toys, right, is that they can then begin to start to, quote unquote, practice with safe objects, right? Of course, keeping them safe. But they're still very realistic. They're still very concrete in their thinking. They don't have that imagination yet. They don't have that language. And then somewhere around 18 months, give or take, through their second birthday, your toddler will then perform a simple pretend action on toys or other people. So those first 6 months is on themselves. And now your child will continue to use realistic looking toys, but they'll expand outside of themselves, such as feeding their baby doll, right? Or pretending the airplane can fly up in the sky. It's not this inward, right? They're beginning to expand their world because they have 6 more months of life experience. But typically at this stage, your toddler will imitate familiar actions and that we do, right? They'll be watching us a lot more with our actions and putting it in a better understanding. Like I remember our daughter in the back of the car taking a pretend phone and popping the antenna. So that was back in the early 2000s when we didn't have smartphones yet. We just had a good old-fashioned cell phone, but we all had antennas on top that we would have to pull out and push back in. So now you can really check my age. But she would do that with something that looked like a phone, right? It could be a box, it could have been a block, but she would use that because it represented something very familiar in real life. Then the third stage would come to be around that second birthday. And this is this is when they begin to do a series of familiar actions. So the first one is a single action, pretend action on themselves. The next one is a single action outward with another toy or another person. Now they're having very similar to how their language is developing at this stage around that second birthday. They're really starting to put words together, right, to build little phrases and sentences. But now they're beginning to combine their pretend actions together. So at this stage, your toddler might act out a series of actions related to a very familiar routine, such as what you guys do to eat, right? So they might act that out. Oh, I take out the dishes, I put in the food, I stir it up, I blow on it, or it could be the actions related to going to bed. Again, all of these actions are familiar to them that they have seen you do and participated in over and over again. And It could be, blowing on the food, like I said, and then giving it to the baby. All of those different steps, 3, 4, 5 different steps, but they're all within one action or one content. Now, at this stage, somewhere around their second birthday up through 30 months of age, they can use less realistic objects. And that's important because that's telling us they're starting to imagine outside of the concrete learning. And they're starting to generalize. And that's that cognitive ability that's stretching. But at the same time, at this particular age, and so we're looking at that 2 to 2.5-year-old, the objects that they're using are similar in shape. So, for example, my daughter pushed back the antenna, but she always found something that was handheld in a rectangular shape that looked very similar to the phone. And so it's important when we really study play and where a child is, we want to meet them where they're at and understand, they're still at that concrete stage, but they're adding to it. They can do multiple things with fixing dinner or putting your baby to bed or taking a bath or any of those routines, but they're a little bit more flexible with the tools that they use or the objects. So there you can see their cognitive ability stretching a bit. Then the fourth stage gets pretty exciting, and that's around 30 months and all the way up close to that third birthday. And again, these age ranges wiggle a little bit here and there, but these are good approximations. And now they have a series of less familiar actions. And this where you can see, the creativity happening, right? So they are using less familiar themes in their play. And this is when perhaps they're pretending to be a doctor, or they're pretending to be a waiter or a cashier, right? And so it's not their everyday, like sitting down and eating dinner at home or taking a bath or feeding. And those are regular routines, but they go out to the store and they understand the cashier's job, or perhaps they often see a bus driver or this or that. So they're expanding their concepts of the world and starting to imagine beyond their home, right? Beyond themselves, beyond their daily routine. So children can pretend without an object now. So closer to that 30 months of age, and as they approach that their third birthday, they can pretend to use their hand as a cup, right? My daughter would always pretend to be driving in the back seat, using that steering wheel. She's imagining the steering wheel in her hand, right? Or kids put their hands up to their eyes like they're binoculars, right? They're imagining holding on to that binocular and looking through. So you see how cognitively they're moving beyond the concrete that's hard and fast right in front of themselves. And I think that it's important to understand how a lot of professionals, whether they're educators or therapists, doctors, we mix this up. And as soon as a kid is starting to walk and talk and they're hitting that second birthday, we have unrealistic expectations. We think they should be play acting these roles and playing with other kids and all of that. They're not developmentally ready. And that's where I struggle a lot with our current daycare systems. And I've spent many years educating and trying to help programs really understand what is developmentally appropriate and what is not. But that's also for another conversation. But I think it's important that 30 months to 36 months, so it's 2.5 to 3 years of age, they're just beginning to tap into imagining beyond themselves, right? And it's also important that you can see that they will use things that don't necessarily resemble. They'll ad lib a little bit more in their creativity. And so they're a little less concrete. And again, you have to spend some time watching them and seeing what they do. And if you feel like your son or daughter are not doing it on their own, right? Say they're 2.5 and then go in there and kind of facilitate it and see how they respond. Maybe they just need a nudge, right? A little love behind their bum and to say, here, let's pretend we're looking through these binoculars and looking at the clouds, or let's pretend that we're going to be at a restaurant and I'm going to give you my order and see if they go with it. And so the 5th stage, and again, these ages are a little soft, but it's important to keep them in mind, right? You don't expect your 2-year-old to be doing what I'm going to describe right now. And that's the big difference, right? There's a big difference between a new 2-year-old and a new 3-year-old. And I often say that to parents. They'll say, oh, I have a 2-year-old, blah, 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 blah. And I'll say, is he new or has he been there for a while? Right? So a brand new 24-month-old is going to look a lot different than a 30-month-old. And that's going to look a lot different than a 33-month-old. So we have to keep that in mind. But this 5th stage is usually emerging around that 3rd birthday. So it's usually between 3 and 5 years of age as this begins to percolate. So now at this stage, your child really starts his true imagination beyond the concrete real life, right? His daily routines and then some routines that he sees out and about in the community. But now he can imagine something that doesn't really exist. Maybe he saw it in a book, maybe he saw it on television, but it's not real. Such as pirates or castles or superheroes. All of those kinds of things are far beyond his life experience. He's seen some of them, perhaps, like I said, I hope not too much screen time, but in a book, right? And then now he's building that imagination. And that's another reason why the screen sometimes gives us too much of that visual input. And we want that visual imagination to really develop inside their own mind. And that's why you can read a book to a child and each one of the listeners, whether you have like say 3 kids there, they're going to imagine differently inside their own head. And that's the critical piece. But at this 5th stage, your child will start to pretend with other children, and that's huge. So I want you to be really clear that this is not expected until their 3rd birthday and beyond. By the time that they're 3, we should be encouraging them and helping them, but there's still going to be a lot of hand over hand, learning how to play together. Because up until their 3rd birthday, there's a lot of parallel play. And that is healthy and normal and typical. So I know sometimes it's hard for professionals to hear that. And I think sometimes for parents too. And a child might be okay at 2.5 on Tuesday, but Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, he melts down whenever he goes to play. And that's why you have this dysregulation and a lot of uncertainty when a child goes off to preschool or daycare, and you think that they're used to this stuff. And they simply aren't because they haven't mastered it yet. Is not necessarily developmentally appropriate. And so it's this 5th stage between 3 and 5 where they start to really pretend with other children and they start taking on different roles. And the reason behind this is because they can imagine beyond themselves and they don't rely on the concrete items in their world, like the pretend toys. That they can now use more of verbal and nonverbal to help them pretend, to help them imagine. So they can use gestures or mimes or even unrealistic objects, right? So it could be that they are waving their hand, but they imagine that they have a magic wand in their hand. Or if they say, here, I'm going to play doctor, you tell me where it hurts, lay down here, and I can pretend and imagine wrapping a bandage around your broken leg, right? And so now we can use language, much more sophisticated nonverbal communication, to really help communicate with my play partner here, and we can work together. So keep in mind that the realistic objects and toys aren't needed at this stage, and that we really want to see your child use more language and more creative imagination so they get along. Not always, right? That 3, 4, 5-year-old aren't always going to get along. They might both want to be the doctor and you can't, right? So then that's where they're learning to negotiate, and they say, I'm going to be the doctor first and then you can be, right? And see how they can work it out with themselves. And that's so rich and so important to experience over and over and over again, and to figure out who they are, right? Do I really have to be in charge of this clinic here? And do I have to be the doctor? Or can I just, be a nurse? Or maybe I can, be a patient that kind of comes and goes and I can get better each time, whatever it is. But you're giving them that opportunity to exercise and practice that in real time over and over and over again. So those are the 5 predictable stages, looking at the self-pretend, right, between 12 months and 18 months. Then the simple pretend at 18 months to 24 months, where they pretend one action on themselves or a toy or one other person, right? Then the third one is a series of familiar actions with something that they've experienced day in and day out, like taking a bath or feeding your teddy bear. The fourth one is now a series with less familiar, and that they are pretending to be the doctor or a waiter, like I said, and that they're expanding their imagination and putting themselves in an imaginary life experience. And then the final one, which really does last until their 11th birthday, is really role playing with other children. And that's where this pretend play can really, really help kids with higher order thinking and social skills and problem solving and all of this. And so it's important that we give them plenty of time to pretend, right? To act out, to imagine. And that's why reading books and helping them trigger ideas and talking about things, because they will take that information and then act it out, and take that information and expand upon it in imaginary, like being a pirate or being a fairy or being the soldier or whatever it may be. So I did want to include in this discussion some activities for your infant, because remember, we want to build those early cognitive skills that then support problem solving and exploration. And so I just wanted to run through, I'll put this in that list and that handout that you can have. But if you have a younger child or a child who's developmentally younger, say you have a 14-month-old, but they're still working through a lot of these milestones. But these are activities that are really designed to stimulate that cognitive growth and encourage exploration and encourage problem solving. So things like blocks, of course, that's kind of the toy number one, but it really does help them with their spatial reasoning, and that's building that early cognitive skills. And then we have the Lego Duplos, those big ones. Those are my favorite of all time, secondary maybe to the magnets. But again, helping build and problem solve. It also helps with that fine motor, the left and right hemisphere. one hand and the second, and the right hand and the left hand. Of course, like I just mentioned, the whole story time and stimulating that imagination and giving them a lot of rich language. Tummy time, tummy time, tummy time. Mirror games, right? Infants and young children are very fascinated with the mirrors, and because it gives them a reflection and builds their own self-awareness, right? That curiosity. Oh, I feel my lips coming together, and then what happens? What does it look like, right? And it looks like mama's, or they're making faces or making sounds in there. All of that curiosity and self-awareness. And then sensory bins. Again, you have to be mindful of if they're still putting a lot of things in their mouth. But after that after that first birthday, they should be a little less mouthy, right? You can use things that are safe, silk or soft fabrics, bumpy textured toys, right? Different pieces of wood and water, of course, and sand and all of those kinds of things. But that's really shaping their sensory processing ability. And then, of course, hide and seek, that we want that object permanence, right? And for you to ask them, oh, where is it? Where is it? What happened? What happened? And then you can give them that language under the couch or under the blanket. Those kinds of language as well as cognition. Then there's those interactive songs. I'm always encouraging, the itsy bitsy spider or head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes, knees and toes. I know you're laughing at me, hopefully. But that really encourages that motor skill and cognitive understanding directions, right? And movement helps foster, ignite that language. And then there are those back and forth games, right? Creating those dialogue environments or early dialogue where you mimic each other's sounds and you play back and forth and fill in the blank and those kinds of things. And then, of course, number 10. And like I said, I'll have this outline as part of the link down below, but the shape sorters. And that, I think a lot of parents try to get kids to identify the language, like, oh, triangle, circle, square. And that's nice, but that's just rote learning because they still don't have an understanding. And so we want them to be able to look at that visually and then discriminate the sizes, the shapes, and then being able to manipulate it and problem solve. Why does this square not fit in this circle? Right? Because they're different. And this circle fits in the circle because they're the same, that concept of same and different, and lining things up and trying again. Remember, we're looking at growth mindset. So we want, it doesn't work. Try another one. That's a circle. We need to find the circle. That's a star. They don't match. They're different. Try another one. That's okay. Try another one. So you're always helping them with just, try it again. You're getting closer. There's only 5 or whatever. And so the idea is to use these early on, and you can always go back. We can always look at, same and different objects, right? Whether they're animals or people or that kinds of thing. And sensory bins can be throughout their whole childhood, right? It can start in a small container, a tub in your backyard, and then you can freewheel it by playing around in the stream with supervision, of course. But you want to build their sensory awareness and all of those processing systems that help solidify the mastery of this world, right? 3-dimensional world, cognitively, physically, emotionally, linguistically, all of them come together. So I will put that list in the handout. Also, I wanted to then touch upon if you have a child and you're not quite sure where they are, look at their play, study their play, and see if you can line them up in this early development. Or if you feel like your child is struggling, he's not a very good pretend player, say he's close to his 3rd birthday or something, or they're just kind of stagnant, right? They've plateaued a little bit. Then there are some sequential processes that we have used in therapy that I would like to share, and I can dive deeper in another episode, but I wanted to bring them to light so you can at least have them in your forebrain and use them in your day-to-day experiences so you can glean a little more authenticity to what's going on under their head, right? Because like I said in the very beginning, your little ones, your 1 and 2, and even your 2.5-year-old doesn't have a lot of language. They can't always tell you exactly what they're doing or what they understand or what they don't understand or what they're questioning. So we have to look at their ability to negotiate this world and then figure out where they are developmentally and how to support them at that stage, right? So the first thing is when we're looking at the sequential process of pretend play, that you can help them with those familiar objects and to use them appropriately. Like in the beginning, in that self-pretend, is where they pretended with a spoon to eat. They weren't really eating, right? But they're pretending. Or you could show them pushing the truck or stacking the blocks, that this is what we do with these toys. Roll the ball, pretend to read a book, pretend to rock a baby, pretend to pound a hammer. All of that is around 12 to 15 months. And that you're helping them, quote unquote, play in this imaginary, right? It's not a real hammer. It's, you're not really building a house, right? But these are toys that are representing something that's possible in the real world. And you're helping them do one action at a time. And then if they got that, then you say, okay, let's see if I can help them learn to use the object herself or himself, right? And so think about on her or to herself. Like I said, in part of the 5 predictable stages, can they feed themselves? Or what are the steps in taking a bath or sleeping items or dress up? Can they do it to themselves? Because I've been with a lot of toddlers. I can put the fire hat on them and give them the hose and all of that. But I want them to start to initiate them. I want them to imagine being the firefighter or being the mama who's taking care of the baby or those kinds of things. But they have to do it for themselves. And then you can help your toddler learn how to use objects on another person. And so you can perhaps encourage them to put the crown on Papa. Go put the crown on Papa. Or give Papa some lipstick. Or put this sword into Papa's belt. Or any of those kinds of things. And I think it's important that we distinguish where they are. Whether they acted out naturally for themselves and on themselves, and then can they expand their horizon and think beyond and start to engage, go brush Papa's hair with this brush. And so if you're questioning where your child might be in this developmental stage, right, these stages, then try your best to analyze through watching them and engaging with them. And see how they respond, right? Again, a lot of kids need more hand over hand teaching and helping them through. We don't want to rush them, right? And so if you're looking at her and you want to do it to Papa, right? Oh, let's go dress up Papa as the queen or the king or whatever. And she wants to wear the crown and she wants to put the sword on and she wants to climb in the truck. Let her. That's where she is. She's at a younger developing phase. And so you encourage that. And then perhaps she can watch you do it to the older brother or to Papa or to the cat or whatever. But it's a dance. And that's where I want to encourage all parents to be involved each and every day. Right? And these are some of my concerns with the current daycare systems that our modern world has developed, created, established. And I've watched the change. And so I'm concerned that your child doesn't have the subtle nuances there and the understanding. And we can talk about that a lot in the near future. And I have some episodes planned on that and some guests scheduled. But I think it's important that at home with you, let's figure this out. And so you can also help your toddler learn to combine objects in pretend play. So say they're putting the sword on and putting the crown on, or they're just fighting with a sword. Help them add steps to that. Let's go and walk around the castle and pull up weeds or whatever knights do. I don't know. Or direct traffic or that kind of stuff. Or you could feed the baby and cover the baby with a blanket and put the baby to bed. Give the teddy bear a bath, dry him off, put his work clothes on, and then put him in the truck and he goes off to work. Help them build some imaginary steps that is relatable. This is what Daddy does. He takes a shower, he gets dressed, climbs in his truck, and he goes to work, right? Those kinds of steps. And so all I'm saying here is if you're open to kind of analyzing where your child is, and then, like I often say, meet him or her where he or she is and join them and then see what they do. Right? So if you notice, for example, they're not interested in combining objects, then make it simpler. Go back, right? Let him, like I said, put it on himself and then just march around. Because he will stay with you and play with you for longer periods if you continue to be interested in what he's doing at that time. That's what child-led play is. I just want to encourage you to be patient, understand that these are processes, it takes time, and a lot of professionals, a lot of my colleagues, and then the professionals in the daycare, in the preschools, get it wrong. They're pushing them to go to where they're not ready to go yet. And there are these subtle nuances that I think are really, really important. And if we give them a couple of weeks or a couple of months here, say they're playing and putting the dress-up clothes on themselves and they're not really sharing on the outside with you or the big brother or whatever, that's okay. Give them that wiggle room. The key takeaway here, I think, is that we can't push through pretend play. Again, I hate to moan and groan with the professionals out there, but I think society at large and the powers that develop curriculum, and I think that's terrible to develop curriculum for a 2-year-old, but it is where we are. And so I want to talk to you, new mom, at home. What can you do? Even if you use a daycare center, what can you do with your time at home, right? To not push through this pretend and let it develop over time, that it starts to really emerge more imaginatively around that second birthday, right? Prior to that, they're still much more functional. And then they'll start around that second birthday with playing on themselves. And they'll use one step, right? And then they'll build a series with familiar actions and then a series with less familiar actions. And then around that third birthday, they start to role play with other children. And it's a lot of trial and error. They're trying to figure out, how do I negotiate being a human being with other kids? It's tricky unless he comes from like my family. I think I've shared with you, I'm the seventh of 9. And even then, sharing was exhausting, right? But part of this process, and I'll just close with this, is really helping you get in touch with your inner child and your imagination and being okay with it and staying in the moment. Let your child lead, and then you kind of poke the flames a little bit and try to really get some heat going, right? And I assure you that your child will be very interested and very motivated to play with you if you make it about them and if you feel connected with each other, right? So the truth is, and a lot of parents have shared this, that they're concerned that others will look at them and saying, "Oh my gosh, you're just messing around with trucks, or you're just play. That's all you do all day." But hear me out here. You're helping your child think symbolically, and you're developing critical thinking skills that will serve him or her throughout his whole life. So when children play with adults and other children, and that starts to emerge around that third birthday, they learn how to get along, right? They learn how to problem solve, how to communicate their needs and their wants. They learn how to wait, which is really tricky, and learn how to use language to explain themselves, to negotiate, to convince others. So play is the way children learn these skills. And language is one of the most important skills, I think. Yes, I'm biased, but let's be real. But language is one of the most important skills that children learn while they play. Period. So before true imaginary or pretend play can occur, your healthy, thriving toddler needs to experience all of these stages, these processes, and build up through true imagination and expanding. And so it starts to emerge around that second birthday, but you can really see them honing that around that third birthday, where they start to play with others, and then up through their tween years, right? 11, 12 years of age. That's important. And the goal, the ultimate goal would be that we can continue that throughout our lives, right? Let's think of people who, quote unquote, work and love their work so much that they bring this playful imagination. Builders, designers, writers, storytellers, actors, chefs, artists, explorers, landscapers, teachers. So the takeaways: don't push too soon. Meet him or her where he or she is. Model, then step back and wait. Use your language concretely, then wait. Be present, engaged, playful, childlike, and follow their lead, right? So I do have a handout. I have some links down below to Dr. Andrew Huberman, Dr. Stuart Brown, Dr. Carol Dweck, all of these people who have really helped me over the years understand what my mission was every time I walked into a therapy room and got on the floor with my kids, your kids, our kids, right? So thanks again for spending time with me. I truly, truly appreciate it. So God bless, and I'll see you next week.